Okay, so this week we are interviewing Allie Marks. She's from Forest Grove High School. She is also the presenter that all of the English teachers in the district watched when we went to the Proficiency conference, and she's the gal with the really cool Tom boots. So Allie, the first question I have for you is, can you tell us how many years Forest Grove has been doing proficiency grading, as well as you?
Yes, so we sent a group of teachers to see a BEC conference in the fall of 2008. I was one of those teachers. Came back to my classroom and wanted to kind of dabble in proficiency a little bit. So I had the opportunity to see how I was grading kids, and I learned pretty quickly that I was grading them based on whether they were smiling and nodding when I was talking, whether they were doing their homework, whether they were good kids, instead of based on what they actually knew of the content. So after that first semester, I got a few other teachers on board with me. We had an English 9 team that piloted proficiency, as well as an interdisciplinary team. So that was for 9th grade, an English teacher, a social studies teacher, and a science teacher that piloted together. So now we're kind of moving into the spring of 2009. And then the following fall of 2009, the entire school went on board. So since 2009, all of the teachers in this building have been grading by proficiency.
All right, can you tell us what was the hardest shift for you and for the English department, making that transition?
Okay, so our most difficult challenge was certainly trying to communicate what proficiency is and why we were doing it to both students and parents, and I would say that this continues to be a challenge in some cases. The reason that we decided to make the move to proficiency is that around 2007, 2008, we would have upwards of 25 valedictorians, and then when we would look at their SAT scores, they would be scoring below the state and national average in the SAT. So we were realizing that our grades that we were assigning to kids didn't really mean anything, and we wanted to make sure that we changed that and that we would have students who were able to do and know certain things in classes and before they moved on. And so communicating that to parents was definitely a challenge and required a lot of administrative support, and also teachers getting together and making sure that classes were fairly uniform, just so that we weren't crazy people that were doing something while other people were doing something completely different. So I would say that that was the biggest challenge.
Okay, and can you talk a little bit about how your English department collaborates, or what kinds of things do you do to ensure that proficiency grading is smooth across the entire department?
So we are vertically aligned, and that goes all the way from about 7 to 12, and we're trying even harder to have more collaboration between our upper elementary school, our middle school, and our high school to make sure that we're not repeating essential standards across that vertical alignment component. And then we also have PLC meetings at least every 2 weeks. We have late start Wednesdays, so that time is specifically designated to meet with PLCs. So we all get together, we talk about strategies that we're using in our classes, we revise scoring guides, we look at benchmark assessments, and then we also have department meetings. And so right now we're working within our department to look at particular assignments that we're giving to kids and making sure that our students are prepared for success in the 2 AP classes based on the assignments that are being given in the lower grades. So.
Okay, all right. And can you talk a little bit about the very practical steps or practical things that teachers can do to wrap their minds around proficiency grading, or to start implementing it in the classroom?
So what I always recommend is that first, in some sort of team or individually, you come up with essential standards, and you choose those essential standards based on what students need to know to be successful at the next level in college and in life. So we're really looking at those big ideas as opposed to the more minuscule things that maybe would be scaffolding to get to those big ideas, but that students don't need to know to be successful. After that, we create scoring guides that are based on those essential standards. And one thing that I always say is that if a scoring guide already exists that kids are going to be held accountable to, that you shouldn't recreate it as a teacher, which means that we use the Oregon State scoring guide and we use the AP scoring guides in our classrooms. So really the only scoring guides that you're creating are for your literature and your reading standards. And then after that, we create assessments based on those scoring guides. So just making sure that students are able to demonstrate what they know, and then they'll be assessed using that scoring guide. And in terms of really practical things, I think it's important to communicate with your administrator what your essential standards are and how students are going to be graded. So if there is ever a conflict, your administrator already knows what's happening in your classroom and supports that. That's something that I do at the beginning of every year, just to make sure that we're going to be cool if any essential or if any challenge comes up, any conflict. And then just in terms of like a really major, I guess I would say, suggestion is if you have the opportunity to play around with this a little bit and just use a scoring guide for one unit that you don't normally use a scoring guide for, or really look at your grade book and see what percentage is going, toward content and what percentage is going toward homework and participation. I think just knowing those things before you go all the way into proficiency is something that can be really helpful.
Okay, thank you so much. And there's, we wanted to ask you specifically about writing, and or not just writing, but students turning in late work. So much of what we do in an English classroom is almost like product. It's like kids have to produce a product. So how do you handle that, or what are some strategies you have for teachers?
So one of the changes that I made when I transitioned into proficiency-based teaching and grading was I decided that I wanted students to do the work that would go into my 90% or my proficiency section in class in front of me. And the reason that I wanted that to happen was because I wanted to know that it was authentically their work if 90% of their grade was going to be based on it. And secondly, I found that it was a huge motivator for kids. For some reason, when I would send them home to do something, it wouldn't click with them, they weren't doing it, but if I asked them to do it in class in front of me, students would be more inclined to actually show me what they know, show me what they know. And so I always say that sometimes you have to force kids to find success, but if you're doing a lot of formative assessment and you know what your kids are able to do, when it comes to that assessment that's going to go toward the majority of their grade, it's much easier to force them to pick up a pencil in front of you and start writing if you know that they're capable of doing that. And it's just their little hang-up that's stopping them. So,
all right. Yeah. Do you have any final closing comments, tips, or suggestions for English teachers moving to proficiency grading next year?
Yeah, I would just say that don't feel like what happens in your classroom on a daily basis is going to change. I'm sure that Jen and Camille can say that what they saw in my classroom today and in our building is probably pretty similar to what you would see in a classroom that isn't proficiency-based. It's just more about making content and knowledge explicit for students, making it transparent so that there are no mysteries about what their grade is going to be. And I think that that's exciting, and it can be really empowering for our kids. So I recommend that you try it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.